The phantom signal. Nathan stretched his legs out on the couch, letting out a sigh. His eyes were glued to the static flickering on the TV, but his mind was somewhere else. Friday nights were usually for hanging out with Ben and Corey, watching movies or playing video games. But tonight was different. I swear, this signal thing is driving me nuts, Ben muttered, fiddling with the antenna on the old radio he brought over. Corey leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching with mild interest. It's probably just some old ham radio junk. My grandpa used to listen to stuff like that. Ben didn't seem convinced. No, this is different. I caught part of it last night, but it only came through for a few seconds. It was like voices, but all broken up. Nathan raised an eyebrow. Voices? Like a broadcast, kind of. But it didn't sound right, like they were cut off halfway through saying something. You've got to hear it. Nathan wasn't sure why Ben was so fixated on this. The guy had a habit of getting caught up in weird stuff, but this seemed like a stretch. Still, there was something about the idea of a mysterious signal that intrigued him, too. He sat up a little, suddenly more interested. Ben twisted the radio's knob, fine-tuning the dial. For a few moments, there was only the crackle of static. And then, something faint, a low hum, followed by what sounded like distant, distorted voices. There it is, Ben whispered, his eyes wide. Nathan leaned forward, trying to make out the sounds. The voices weren't clear, just bits and pieces, but there was something unsettling about them. It was like overhearing a conversation you weren't supposed to. Creepy, Corey muttered, stepping closer to the radio. You think it's some kind of pirate station or something? Ben shook his head. I don't think so. It's not on any regular frequency. It's in between, like it's broadcasting from somewhere else. Corey laughed. You mean like another dimension? Come on, man. Nathan didn't laugh. There was something off about this. The more he listened, the more the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. The voices sounded desperate, almost like they were calling for help, but the words were too garbled to understand. Let me try something, Ben said, grabbing his phone. I've been recording whenever the signal comes through. Maybe we can figure out what they're saying. He played the recording, but it was the same as before, just fragments of words, broken up by static. Nathan strained to hear, but none of it made sense. Wait, Corey said, his face suddenly serious. Did you hear that? It said don't follow the signal. I swear I heard it. Nathan rewound the recording and listened again. This time, he caught it, too. It was faint, but unmistakable. Don't follow the signal. What the hell? Ben muttered, his eyes darting between Nathan and Corey. Nathan's stomach churned. Maybe we should leave this alone, man. Ben, always the stubborn one, shook his head. No way. Now I have to know what this is. It's probably just some weird broadcast. I bet we can track it down. Nathan exchanged a look with Corey, who seemed just as uneasy, but Ben was already packing up the radio, a determined look on his face. The next night, the three of them drove out to a secluded area on the edge of town, where Ben claimed the signal was strongest. The road was dark and winding, the headlights barely cutting through the thick trees lining both sides. Nathan felt a knot forming in his chest as they pulled up to a small clearing. The radio sat on the dashboard, crackling with static. Here we go, Ben said, turning the dial. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then, the familiar hum started, followed by the distorted voices. But this time, they were louder, clearer. Help, trapped, one of the voices said, the words broken but audible. Corey shifted uncomfortably in the back seat. Maybe this isn't a good idea, man. We don't know what we're messing with. Ben ignored him, adjusting the frequency. Suddenly, the radio let out a high-pitched screech, and the car's headlights flickered. What the hell? Nathan muttered, glancing at the dashboard. The entire car seemed to be losing power, the engine sputtering as if something was draining it. Turn it off, Corey shouted. Ben frantically twisted the knob, but the radio wouldn't shut off. The screeching grew louder, and the voices became more frantic. It's coming. Don't listen. The words sent a chill down Nathan's spine. The radio was practically shaking, and then, without warning, the headlights went out completely, plunging them into darkness. For a moment, there was only silence. Nathan's breath was shallow, his heart pounding in his chest. Then, from somewhere in the distance, they heard a low, rumbling sound, like something massive moving through the trees. Start the car, Ben, Corey yelled, panic in his voice. Ben fumbled with the keys, but the engine wouldn't turn over. The rumbling grew louder, closer, as if whatever it was knew they were there. Nathan's pulse raced. He stared out into the darkness, straining to see. There, between the trees, something moved. It was hard to make out, but it was tall, impossibly tall, and shifting unnaturally, like it didn't belong in this world. Ben, now, Nathan shouted. Finally, the engine roared to life. The headlights flickered back on, and in that brief moment, Nathan caught a glimpse of it, a towering, shadowy figure with too many limbs, moving closer, its presence filling the air with a suffocating sense of dread. Ben floored the gas, and the car lurched forward, tires skidding on the gravel as they sped away. The radio continued to screech, the voices garbled and frantic, but Nathan couldn't focus on it anymore. All he could think about was getting as far away from that place as possible. They drove in silence for what felt like hours, the signal finally fading as they neared town. When they finally pulled into Nathan's driveway, none of them spoke. Ben shut off the car, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. "What the hell was that?" Corey whispered, breaking the silence. Nathan shook his head, unable to answer. He didn't want to know. All he knew was that they had heard the warning, and they hadn't listened. As they stepped out of the car, Ben's phone buzzed with a new notification. He pulled it out and stared at the screen, his face going pale. "What is it?" Nathan asked. Ben turned the phone around, showing them the text message. "It's not over." The message was from an unknown number. That night, Nathan couldn't sleep. The radio's screech still echoed in his mind, and every shadow in his room felt like it was watching him. He knew they had uncovered something they shouldn't have, something far beyond their understanding. And whatever it was, it wasn't finished with them yet.